Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, 50 Money Management Tips. I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Since this is a virtual event, please excuse any technical issues or glitches that may pop up. If you experience problems with your video or audio, click the reconnect button to get back to the webinar right away. We are recording this webinar and plan to upload it onto our website later this afternoon. Have a question throughout today's presentation? Drop it in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A before we go. This webinar is part of our ongoing Backpacks to Briefcases series geared towards students and young alumni, but open to anybody. By attending these events, you can earn credit toward an evergreen certificate. All you have to do is join us for various events throughout this year, virtually or in person. Find out more at alumni.uab.edu/backpacks. After today's presentation, I'll highlight a couple of upcoming events that are included in this program. Today, we're excited to welcome back Dr. Stephanie Yates to our webinar series. Dr. Yates is the inaugural director of the Regions Institute for Financial Education and the Regions Institute for Financial Education Endowed Professor. She obtained her MBA and MBE, from the University of Cincinnati before earning her PhD from LSU. Dr. Yates is an accredited financial counselor, certified financial planner, and a registered financial consultant. Dr. Yates, welcome back. It's good to have you back on our webinar series.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
I'm going to turn things over to you. Margaret's putting up your slides, and away we go.
Fantastic. Okay. So, Greg, before you go, can I move the slides or does Margaret do that? Oh, can't hear a word you're saying.
That is because one of those technical issues, I muted myself too soon. You can go ahead and click the next button on the bottom of the screen. It's all yours, your pace.
Okay, perfect. So this is a fun topic because this is just going to be like rapid fire, wide-ranging topics on personal finance and just kind of giving you some little nuggets to think about instead of going deeply into any one area. So let's just get going. So again, I'm going to be very wide-ranging. I'm going to cover all of these different areas of personal finance, which is just about all of them. And the objective here is in each of these areas to just give you a couple of things to think about. So if you take a look at this list, if you recognize that there are one or two places where you probably need to spend a little bit more time, then hang on for when I get to that area. And you might want to make notes of a couple of suggestions that I make. But just like anything in personal finance, it's very personal. So not everything may apply to you, and not everything may be interesting or a priority for you. So that's why we're going to make it very broad, and hopefully something will be useful. So starting off with the basics, or kind of setting that foundation. And so, Greg, I had notes and now I can't see my notes with this format.
If you want to share your screen, we can do it that way too. It just sucks the life out of the Wi-Fi, so we'd have you turn your monitor or your video off for that. So if you want to do that, and this is a little inside baseball for the people watching, so apologize. On the top of your screen, one of those icons should say turn screen share. So if you have you'd have to have your PowerPoint up though. Or if it works better, I can advance your slides and you can look at your notes and you just tell me when to flip them.
I thought I had it open, but I don't see it. And I don't want to take up too much time, so I will wing it.
Sounds like a plan. If you need anything, let me know.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so sorry for the sidetrack. Starting with that foundation, creating a financial calendar just means that it might be worth it to just make yourself a note of things that you need to do at certain intervals, and just kind of jotting those down so that you refer to those periodically isn't a bad idea. Next, check your interest rate. So when interest rates are changing, so recently we've realized some very low interest rates, and now they're climbing again. So when we're in this kind of volatile interest rate environment, it may be worth it to just check and make sure that you may not be able to get a better deal. So if you had a loan at a very high interest rate, and then back when interest rates dropped, maybe it made sense for you to refinance. Conversely, if I don't know, most things where we've locked in a low interest rate, like credit cards, we want to keep those. We want to keep our interest rates on our borrowing low. But let's say, for example, I'm trying to think of in this rising interest rate environment, I don't know, maybe if you've locked in some type of fixed investment at a low interest rate, it may make sense to reconsider something like that. And then third, on our foundational issues, track your net worth. And I always laugh about this one, because years ago, and I don't think this is a thing anymore, but years ago, I found this website that married personal finance and social media, where people were posting their net worth. And they were talking about, well, here's my net worth today. Here is my strategy for improving it. And they would kind of share information. I don't know that I want to share that much information, but my point here is it may be useful to just periodically check in to see what your net worth is and if you're moving in the right direction. So now let's move on to budgeting. With budgeting, a few things to think about. First of all, you kind of need to have a budget. It's just a useful foundation and tool in good money management. So that's number one. Just make one. And then second, consider using cash. You know, the thing with setting a budget, and then first you have to create the budget or set the budget. But if you don't use it, if you don't stick to it, then you've only accomplished half the battle. And so one way to consider when it comes to sticking to that budget is considering cash, or using, being a kind of cash only consumer. And so if you're cash only, the beauty of that in terms of budgeting is when it's gone, it's gone. And so it's really hard to go over your budget if you're all cash. So just something to consider. So now, another suggestion, and this is more general, but you can relate it to budgeting because we're starting with this foundation, is consider creating for yourself what we call a money minute. It's kind of like if you're into meditation and grounding, just taking a minute each day to just think about what are your goals with the goals relative to money, what's important to you, maybe even what are you going to try to accomplish today relative to managing your money or sticking to your budget. So just something to think about. And then 7 and 8 really kind of go together because budgeting just isn't fun. And so some people suggest, and actually I love this book by Elizabeth Warren called All Your Worth. And so Elizabeth Warren and others suggest that you adopt what's called a 50-30-20 budget, where instead of having line items for all of your different spending categories, which is a little bit more time consuming to set up and to monitor, consider just having 3 categories and allocating 50%, 30%, and 20% of your net income to those 3 categories. And so those categories are your needs. That's where 50% of your money goes. Your wants, or as I've mentioned it here, your lifestyle spending, that's where 30% goes. And then savings, that's where the 20% goes. And the idea here is, again, I don't have it here, but remember the 50% is going to your needs. So that's like the important stuff that no matter what happens to your income, you still have to cover these expenses. And those would be things like housing, transportation, basic food, basic clothing, the stuff that no matter what, you still are going to have to incur those expenses. And then the 30% for wants, those are the things that you've got a little bit more flexibility with. You've got some discretion. And then the idea of 20% to savings is such that that's pretty high relative to what most people save. And so if you're able to save at that level, then you're going to be more capable of withstanding some sort of economic downturn or loss of income than the average person who doesn't save that much. So what's a helpful definition of needs? I see the question. Needs, gosh, I don't know of a working definition, but I would say maybe what I always joke about in these webinars is I say, it's something where if you don't cover that expenditure, something bad is going to happen. So if you don't pay the rent, you're not going to have a place to live. If you don't pay your car note, then, thank you. If you don't pay your car note, it's going to be difficult to get to work or school. So I think of, what a helpful, I thought it said, what is a helpful? So I think of needs as those things that are just really critical. And, that's still a great question. I know yours was more of a comment, but that's a great question because that's going to be very personal. So distinguishing between wants and needs is going to be critical for putting together a 50-30-20 budget like that. So let's move on to the next category. The next category of our 50 suggestions or 50 tips here is just more motivational. So if you know that you just need to do a better job of managing your money, but you need a little push to get going. So here are some suggestions on ways to get you moving in the right direction. But before I do that, do you suggest 20% savings above any retirement savings? Not necessarily. Again, it depends on what works for you. But what the kind of the rule of thumb is that yes, the 50-30-20 is going to be on your net. So anything that's taken out of your check in advance for retirement is already accounted for. So ideally, if you could still do 20% after you've taken out retirement, then you are really going to be in good shape. But for a lot of people, they're taking out quite a bit for retirement. So another 20% may be burdensome. So I would say not necessarily, but if you could, that's great. But it really just think about what works for you. I guess the way I tend to look at it is I shoot for the 20% on net, regardless of what I'm putting aside or my client is putting aside for retirement. But if we can't get to 20, then that's okay if we're doing everything we can on the retirement side. So I saw another one. Oh, there was a question and it went away about 20%. Maybe it'll come back. Okay, so back to motivation. So how do you push yourself to just do the right thing when it comes to money? Maybe make a financial vision board. I was just talking about this recently because sometimes we just got to do stuff that we really don't want to do, but we know we ought to do. So having that vision board to keep it top of mind and getting us to do the right thing sometimes is helpful. I remember when I was in graduate school and I was working on my dissertation and it was just a grind. Some days I just didn't want to do it. I needed something to motivate me. And so I said, well, I'm doing this so that I can have a Wolf stove and a Sub-Zero refrigerator. So I found pictures of them and I cut them out and I taped them to my computer monitor. And that was what got me through my dissertation. Also set specific financial goals, like especially if you are going out of your way to maybe do a side hustle, work extra hours to get some extra money. That can be really draining on top of your day job, or you're just working your brains out at your day job. And sometimes you need to feel like you're doing that for a reason, that it's going to get you somewhere. And so in addition to the vision board, maybe setting some specific goals, because like having my Wolf stove, I still don't have my Wolf stove or my Sub-Zero refrigerator, by the way, because I did not make it specific. I did not say, within 5 years after I graduate, I'm going to get this thing and it's going to cost me this much and this is how I'm going to pay for it. So if you set specific financial goals, you're going to be much more likely to achieve them. Also, maybe adopt a spending mantra. Like my kids will tell you that when they were little, we had a spending mantra that says you can't get candy at the checkout, or we can't buy it unless mom has a coupon. Whatever it is that works for you. So think about what's most important to you. And if you have to remind yourself with a mantra, what might that be? Love yourself. Sometimes we're just really hard on ourselves and we say, oh, I'm just terrible with money and I'm a bad money manager. We all make mistakes. And so instead of focusing on the negative, focus on the fact that you're trying to do a better job. And so when we're a little bit more loving and we give ourselves a little bit more grace, then some of these hard things are a little bit easier. Bite-sized money goals. That's why when I talk to people about setting financial goals, I ask them to think about time horizons. So think about short-term, medium-term, and long-term, because if all of your goals are related to retirement, it's hard to get motivated sometimes. But if I have a goal that in the next year, I'm going to accomplish X, and then in 5 years, I'm going to accomplish Y, and in 10 years, I'm going to accomplish Z, then I have more of a roadmap that will guide me through my financial decisions than just looking at something that's way out in the future. So try to put those goals into bite-sized chunks. It makes them more realistic and it makes it easier to stick with them. And just like the loving yourself, get away from all that negativity. Life is just too dang short for negativity. And sometimes we do it to ourselves. This is a fun one. Get your finances in shape along with your body. I talk all the time about how budgets are kind of like diets. And so, we go on a spending diet and we can go on a food diet. And so there's just a lot of similarities. And now I'm seeing that there are even apps and websites that will pay you to get in shape. And I can't think of any of the names off the top of my head, but I'm sure you can Google it and find these. But, another way, old school way people do it is, they will put $1 in a jar for every mile that they run or something like that, or they will reward themselves, so they'll take $1 out of the jar every time they accomplish some sort of physical goal. So the idea is that if these are your two big things that you want to work on, managing your money and managing your health, find a way to put them together, and you can kind of kill two birds with one stone and maybe have some fun while you're doing it. Learn how to savor as I slow down. The idea here is sometimes we overspend because we're always focused on the next thing. And if we spend a little bit more time in the moment, maybe we wouldn't be so worried about spending money on the next thing, that next purchase, and just enjoying. I tell people all the time that I think the younger generation has figured it out a little bit better than the older generation sometimes, particularly when I think about me and what I did when I was the age of my kids. My kids are so much more interested in experiences than we were. We were so much more interested in things. And I'm learning as I get old and gray that it really is the experiences that matter. And so I'm working really hard at savoring these experiences and not worrying so much about the things. And then lastly, a money buddy. It's kind of like your accountability partner when it comes to working out. Find someone who's like-minded and has similar goals. It's kind of like that net worth social media thing I was talking about, where you kind of hold each other accountable and you say, well, I'm going to get my net worth to this, or I'm going to get my debt down to this. And, it's somebody, even if you don't share the details, but you just kind of share enough that you can push each other along. And especially if you find a tip that works for you, you can share it with the other person and vice versa. So just having someone go on this journey with you, and maybe it's your partner, maybe it's not, but just having someone who's like-minded that can help you along the way. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about making money. So again, these are just little nuggets to think about. They may not all be useful, but just something to think about, or maybe pass along to your accountability buddy. If you find yourself in a position where you have to negotiate salary, it is really important that you make them make the first offer, because if you don't know what the range is, you don't know what the possibilities are, you may come in too low. And in fact, I was on a task force recently where we are trying to kind of outlaw this practice where on your application you are asked for your previous salary, because that will often start the negotiating process and potentially put you in a bad position. Because what if your previous employer just didn't have a lot of money and they underpaid you? Or what if it was just a totally different job with less responsibility? So it could be irrelevant. But regardless, if you find that you have to negotiate anything, if at all possible, and we know this from strategy and what we call prisoner's dilemma, that you always want the other side to make the first offer. Also, when you're negotiating, keep in mind that there are other things that you can negotiate besides salary. And sometimes you may get a better deal by looking more broadly. So for example, we tend to think just about salary, and that's important, don't get me wrong. But what about benefits? What about time off? What about remote work? What about anything else that might make your work-life balance make more sense? So think about all of those things that you need and think about the total package. Also, if you find yourself in a position where you are unemployed, don't assume that you don't qualify for unemployment. In a recent, fortunately, it's been a little while, but in the last recession, I want to say that the statistic was like less than half of the people who were eligible for unemployment benefits didn't apply. So, the worst thing that can happen if you're in that situation is that you're denied, but you're absolutely not going to get it if you don't ask for it. My husband jokes all the time that a lot of times not getting just comes from not asking. So make sure you ask. And then lastly, going back to this negotiating, whether it's you're negotiating on the front end, and keep in mind that you have the most bargaining power before you take the job, or if you are already there and you're negotiating a raise or a promotion or something like that, always think about the person on the other side of the table. And so you're going to put, most likely, you are going to put yourself in a negative position if you make all of your negotiating about you or you relative to someone else. You want to talk about the value that you add to the company. And so you do want to talk about you, but in that positive light, not, I just deserve more, or I want to go buy a new car, or things that are really just about you. But you want to talk about how you add value, what you bring to the table, what you're doing, what your long-term goals are in terms of providing value to the organization, and not about anything super personal or anything relative to another employee. So just some things to think about when it comes to negotiating. All right. Switching gears again, we're about halfway through all of our points. Oh, good. And we're about halfway through our webinar. So let's talk about debt. A lot of folks are dealing with debt and just aren't quite sure where to turn. So let me just give you a couple of quick suggestions. If you have a number of personal debt obligations that you're trying to chip away at, sometimes it's hard to figure out, well, how should I prioritize them? And so one suggestion is to start with the little ones, because that psychologically is really useful, because if you've got 10 bills and then it goes down to 9 and to 8 and to 7, that starts to give you the confidence that, oh, I can do this. Oh, I don't feel so overwhelmed. And so psychologically, starting with those small ones and getting rid of those will give you the boost oftentimes to help you conquer the big ones. Don't ever co-sign a loan. And I know we love our friends and family members, but if you can avoid it at all costs, avoid co-signing a loan, because you're trying to help someone get started or reestablish credit. But anything that they do then, once you co-sign, is going to impact their credit history in the same way, or your credit history, I should say, in the same way that it impacts theirs. So if you co-sign on a car loan and they don't make a car payment, it looks like you didn't make the car payment, even though you were the co-signer, because you're taking full responsibility. This also applies, and speaking from experience, this also applies to being the guarantor on a lease. If they don't make their rent payments, then it looks like you didn't make your rent payments, and they can report that to a credit bureau, and that could have a negative impact on you. Every student should fill out the FAFSA form. So a lot of students think, oh, I'm not going to get anything, so it's not worth it. But actually, you may not get a Pell Grant. You may not get the free money that you don't have to repay. But at some schools, that is their gateway to any need-based or non-need-based funds that they have for students. So if you don't fill out the FAFSA at some institutions, it's almost like you don't even exist. So every student should fill out the FAFSA, and that will just kind of unlock the doors to any type of support that's available to them. If you find yourself or your loved ones find themselves in a position of taking out student loans, there is a hierarchy. You want the federal loans and you want the subsidized before the unsubsidized, and then you want the federal loans before the private loans. So the subsidized, so that's first. The subsidized loans means that any interest that accrues over the life of the loan will be paid for by the federal government while that student is in school. Unsubsidized means that basically when that student gets out of school or they are no longer in school, at least part-time, that they may owe more on their student loans than they borrowed because that interest was accruing and the federal government was not covering those interest charges. And then our third level is the private loans, and the interest rates tend to be higher, in some cases, maybe twice as high on a private loan as a federal loan. Now, for some people, that's their only option to make it all work. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying prioritize and try to borrow as little as possible and make sure that you take advantage of the least expensive funds before you tap into the more expensive funds. And I would put those Parent Plus loans in that lower category as well, because they're not going to be subsidized and they're going to have a higher interest rate. When your student gets to the repayment stage, make sure that they're looking at all of the different repayment options. Maybe it makes sense to have a graduated payment. Maybe it makes sense to not have a graduated payment because they're doing well, or they don't have a lot of student loans or a huge amount of debt. But just make sure that they're considering all of their options. And that includes forgiveness. We still have the PSLF, Public Student Loan Forgiveness Program. It's a little bit easier to qualify. And so absolutely, if there's the potential that they're eligible, they should apply, but make sure they understand the rules for those programs. And then lastly, switching gears altogether, but still in this category of debt management. And actually, I say here, opt for mortgage payments below 28% of your monthly income, but I'm going to say it even better and say keep your housing payments below 28% of your monthly income. And the reason why I say housing is if you are just starting out or your loved one is just starting out and they are renting, but at some point they think that they want to purchase a home. You've got to get in the mindset to keep your rent, your housing costs low, under 30% if at all possible. Because if you've gotten used to spending 40, 50% on housing, and then you go to apply for a mortgage, the bank is going to want your payments to be below 28% of your monthly income. And so you might be in line for a rude awakening. But generally speaking, we say that a person is housing burdened if their housing payments are more than 30% of your income. And I know in some metros, it's hard to find good housing in that price range, but that's the goal. Okay, what about spending? When you are making purchases, and I would say just about any purchase, but certainly the kind of the big ticket items, the more expensive things, think about cost per use. Think about a few things, but first let's think about cost per use. So that means it may make sense to spend a little bit more if that thing is going to last us longer. We have evolved into this throwaway society where there's all this fast fashion, for example. What is it? Temu, and there's another one for that's mostly clothes. And they just don't. They're inexpensive, but the quality is not very high, and so you end up actually spending more money because you're constantly replacing. 28% monthly income for mortgage, net or gross? Oh, good question. My preference is, because I'm very conservative, is net. Because if you focus on net, then you know that you're going to be fine. The bank for a mortgage application will probably let you squeak by on gross. But that really is going to depend on what kind of deductions. Like if you are maxing out your retirement, then you'd want to, then they would focus more on gross. So I guess what I'm saying is, from a mortgage qualifying standpoint, I believe those tend to be based on gross, but from a budgeting standpoint, it's really hard to do all that math to figure it to. So my preference, I guess it's not hard to do the math, but you come up with a very different figure. So for budgeting, I do all of my budgeting advice based on net. So, long-winded answer. Sorry about that. Sheen, that's right. Sheen is our throwaway clothing example. So just think about cost per use. I talked about spending on experiences versus things before. A lot of people are moving away from big birthday and holiday gifts and going on cruises and trips and focusing on the experiences. Shop solo. So don't take your accountability partner to the mall with you, because like I cannot go shopping with my mom because she's always like, get it. It's going to look cute on you. And I can get in and get out a lot faster and a lot cheaper when I shop by myself, just like I can't take my husband to the grocery store because he just puts everything in the cart. So think about the people in your life. And if you are able to spend less money when you are by yourself. Spend on the real you, not the imaginary you. Sometimes people spend money for a certain image that isn't necessarily the image that they want to portray or who they even are. And so, that's, again, just a very personal thing, but just think about how you're spending your money. And there are a lot of kind of guardrails that we can put up financially to kind of save us from ourselves. But when you think about your banking and your various accounts, if those cost you money, maybe you need to rethink that. Maybe if you can just get your systems in place, you don't have to spend the money for overdraft protection. For example, my checking account and savings account are linked. So if I run a little too close in my checking account, it's just automatically going to move money into from my savings without charging me anything. Overdraft protection, where they're charging you, tends to be like some sort of a credit arrangement. So so now you are kind of running up a tab to cover those overdrafts. So try to get your house in order so that you don't need that and you don't incur that expense. We talked a lot about retirement savings already. So even if you're young, the sooner you can start, the better. I get a lot of recent grads who say, oh, I just opted out of the retirement plan because I've been a poor, struggling college student all these years. I wanted all the money in my check that I could. But that's exactly the wrong reason to opt out. You want to start saving as soon as possible because the time value of money is real. And if you can just start putting money away, even if it's just a little bit, and then maybe kind of ratchet it up over time, it's going to make a difference. The same thing with saving toward a child's education. I opened 529 accounts for both of my kids the month that they were born. I used to say the day, but I was busy that day, so I couldn't do it that day. But the month they were born, I opened college funds for both of them. And, at that time we were young and I couldn't do a whole lot. So I just put in like $100 a month, and over time I added to it. But they are both in college now, and those funds were lifesavers because I just put it away and just added to it over time as I could afford to. And I just didn't have any worries about how I was going to pay for college. So, so same thing with retirement. And again, just like with the educational funds, try to put it there and don't pull it out early. And there are lots of reasons for that with retirement, because there could be penalties. If you start tapping into Social Security early, it could permanently lower how much you're going to get in Social Security. So really think carefully about cashing out your retirement accounts early. Give money to get money. So in this context of retirement savings, what that means is if you have an opportunity to save towards your retirement and have your contribution matched by your employer, do it. Otherwise, you are leaving money on the table. So you want to max out that match. And then after you've maxed it out, you may want to just stop there or consider other places to park your money, but make sure you get any free money, basically. And then if you're, like I was saying, if you just can't afford to put a whole lot towards retirement, but you want to do something, when you get a raise your retirement savings too. That was what I did when I first came to UAB. I had a young family. I was saving towards their education. I was doing a little something for retirement, but I couldn't do it all. And then every year for the first few years, every time I got a raise, I would just raise my contribution amounts by a percentage or two. So until I got to where I felt more comfortable and I could reach my goals. And that way, by doing it that way, it was money I had never seen before. So if my raise was 3%, I raised my retirement savings by 1%. And so it didn't change my budget any, and I was putting more towards retirement. Let's talk about credit. You should be reviewing your credit report regularly and checking your credit score. So those are two different things. So your report is the history of all of your credit obligations, and then your credit score is somewhere between 300 and 850, and it gives a snapshot to any potential creditor to find out if you're a good credit risk. So I would highly recommend that you go to annualcreditreport.com. I actually suggest that you go 3 times a year, and each time pull a different credit report, because there's 3 different bureaus, so you can get 3 different reports. If every 4 months you pull a report, then you're monitoring your credit file on your own. And then for your credit score, you can get that from annualcreditreport.com as well, but they're going to charge you for it. So the reports are free, but you can go to Credit Karma, which I also love, and you can get your credit score, and that's also free. And I know a lot of folks, myself included, will see their credit score and access their credit score through the credit card company. So whichever way you go, there are lots of free ways to see your credit score, and I highly recommend that you do that regularly. What you don't want to do is not pay attention to this stuff, and then you need to have good credit because you're applying for something and you realize that you don't have it, and maybe you don't have it because there's some things on there that are wrong. So that would be really devastating. So when you pull your credit report from annualcreditreport.com, and I hope you're checking out the chat, because every time I say something cool, all of a sudden the link shows up. So if you're paying attention there, you've got great access to some of these resources that I'm mentioning. So when you pull your free credit report from annualcreditreport.com, if you do find that there's something incorrect, they will allow you right there on the website to dispute it, and I highly recommend that you do. Similarly, if you get your credit score from creditkarma.com and you recognize that, ooh, I've got some work to do, they've got some great what if scenario sections of their website. So you can say, okay, well, what if I paid off this credit card or these two? What will happen to my credit score? So they will give you some strategies for improvement. Speaking of strategies for improving your credit score, one excellent strategy is to keep your credit usage down. So let's say, I'll keep it super simple. Let's say you have one credit card with a credit limit of $1,000. You want to keep your credit balance on that one card under $300. If it is more than that, then you will see your credit score start to go down. So you don't want to have 10 credit cards or even one credit card and they're all maxed out. That is going to hurt you. Do you know if the apps are good? Like Experian has one. Yes, Experian is one of the credit bureaus. So they're very reputable. And so that would be a great one to have as well. One thing I like about Experian is they have a product called Boost. So Experian Boost will allow you to opt in so that certain payments that you make each month would have an impact on your credit score when normally they don't count, like utility payments and cell phone payments. So it's great for a young person who's just getting started and they just don't have any credit. And so we call them credit invisible. And so if you go to Experian Boost, you opt in, then every time you make those payments that normally don't count, now they count. And so they've shown where people can increase their credit score by maybe 50 to 100 points just by opting in to Boost. And then lastly, if you just don't have good credit and it's going to take you a while to get there, how do you get there? Consider getting a secured credit card. So the way that works is that you effectively open up a savings account. So you give them $200, it goes into a savings account, and then they give you a $200 credit line. So that way, if you don't pay your credit card bill, they've already got your money. So it's still a credit card and they'll send you a bill each month and you have to pay it. But if you don't, they've already got your money. So that credit card is secured. And then once you've got some experience in handling that secured credit card, you can kind of graduate to a better card with a lower rate and that is not secured. And so another nice thing about Credit Karma is if you sign up for an account for them, not only can you get your credit score, but now they know everything about you. And so they will suggest credit cards for you, whether it's secured or otherwise. So they've got lots of good information on that site. Next, let's talk about risk management. I'm kind of winding down. We're on our last 10 tips. So with risk management, you need insurance. So I say get more life insurance because most people are actually underinsured. But the question is, does everybody need life insurance? Because remember, life insurance insures the people that you leave behind. But some people buy life insurance so they can build legacies, or maybe they buy life insurance because they have some philanthropic wishes that they can't really fulfill with their own income, but maybe they can do it through life insurance. So just think about that and think about what's important to you. And also get renter's insurance. We've seen it on the news too many times where people have just lost everything because they were underinsured. And in fact, I just was talking to a student recently who had renter's insurance through her apartment building, and she had to pay for it, but it only paid for the apartment. It didn't pay for her stuff. So make sure that you are prepared in case of an emergency. And in many cases, that stuff isn't that expensive, the insurance that is. Preparing for rainy days. When we talked about budgeting, savings should be part of that. So remember, in that 50, 30, 20, 20% was savings. So that should absolutely be a part of your budget formula. And think about where you're going to put that money. Some people just say, well, whatever I don't spend at the end of the month, that's my savings. Yeah, but if you leave it in your checking account, somehow it just kind of tends to burn a hole in our pockets, and we see that money sitting there. So I guess that means I've got extra money to spend on those concert tickets or those red bottoms or whatever it is that I'd like to spend my money on. So what I suggest to people is, if you do the 50-30-20 budget, automate it. So have that 50% automatically go to an account where you don't have a debit card. You just use it for paying those bills. Remember, those were the needs. And then if your bank will allow you to do this, and most of them will, get a second checking account for that 30%. And that's where you do have your debit card, and that's where you go shopping and you go to the movies, and that was your lifestyle spending. And then have that 20% automatically go to a savings account. And for some people, it makes sense for that savings account to be at a totally different bank, to make it a little bit harder to pinch off of that savings. But again, you, so do what makes sense for you. But if you can automate your 50-30-20 and move it into those accounts and have that set up with your direct deposit, that it works really well for my family. I'll say that much. So again, direct deposit is the engine that makes it all go, and it is fantastic. For some people, though, we've been talking about financial institutions off and on. For some people, a credit union makes more sense than a commercial bank. The relationships sometimes are better, stronger, deeper. Like my mom was a teacher and then a principal, and so she has banked at the Teachers Credit Union for 50 years, and she still goes to the credit union every Saturday morning and talks to her folks and gets her money and does her thing, and she has the Christmas club. It's about relationships that we oftentimes don't get at commercial banks. Also, think about what's truly an emergency and how are you going to plan for that. And this is why I needed my notes, because I always forget what I say here. But sometimes we think of things as being emergencies, and they're really not. Like I tease my kids about, like my younger one is totally focused on experiences. And so for him, Lana Del Rey tickets was an emergency, but it's really not. Emergencies are loss of income, transportation issues, housing issues, death in your immediate family, those really big things that can have a huge negative impact. So think about what's truly an emergency and how are you preparing for those emergencies. Well, and then medical issues. And then lastly here, it is possible to have too much in savings. So you need to have a rainy day fund. You need to have an emergency fund. And that emergency fund should cover you for 3 to 6 months if you lose your income, because we find that most people, it takes us 3 to 6 months to get back on our feet if we lose our job. So 3 months if we've got help, 6 months if we don't have help. But if you've got enough money in your emergency fund that will cover you for a longer period, then maybe it's time to start thinking about investing. So once you get to that level and you are investing your money because you've got your foundation, you've got your rainy day fund, some things, and again, just kind of giving you some things to think about, not going deep here. Pay attention to the fees. So many times people get so excited, I'm going to invest, I'm going to buy stock. And they buy and they sell and they buy and they sell. And they rack up all these fees that eat into all the money that they make. So think about what you're doing and how much you're incurring in fees, whether it's because you're paying too much to your broker or because you're just trading too much. So that's one thing to think about. And then if you do get into investing and you've got it set on autopilot, don't just let it go forever. At least once a year, go and take a look at your portfolio, even if it's a retirement portfolio through your employer, and just make sure that you've got your money in the right place for you and for your goals. So those are my 50 things. It took me almost a full hour to get through them all. I felt like I was racing, so I hope I didn't go too fast, but that's why Greg recorded it.
And you didn't go too fast. I mean, you had a nice pace going through it all. I do want to throw a few questions at you that have come in that you missed. Surprisingly, you didn't get them all.
I
You did
missed
great.
them?
There were a couple, but we slide them into different spots. So
Okay.
I think we hoarded them to ourselves. And thank you to Margaret, who's putting all of those links into chat. And it's a great resource for everybody. So when it comes to net worth, what should you use in those calculations?
So net worth is everything that you own minus everything that you owe. So assets minus liabilities is your net worth. So your assets would be the value of your home. So if you were to sell it today, the value of your home, the value of your vehicles, any cash, cash value of life insurance, any investment. So all of your assets. And then subtract out all of your liabilities. So your mortgage, your car payments, your student loans, any other obligations that you have. So assets minus liabilities is your net worth.
With the 20% savings recommendation, is it only retirement savings or other kind of savings as well?
So my recommendation, if you can afford it, is 20% of your net income. And so that would be over and above what you're putting in for retirement, because retirement is usually pre-tax, so before your net.
What are some financial implications to look out for when purchasing your first home or a home in general?
Financial implications, well, affordability, absolutely. And looking at, I was going to say, kind of looking at the market. So affordability, and the bank is not these days not going to let you spend, hopefully, more than you can afford. But there were times when we were letting people come to the table with $50 and buying $1 million house. So just making sure that you understand the loan product that you're signing off on, particularly if you are agreeing to an adjustable mortgage, that you understand the interest rate, you understand the terms, you understand the adjustments, and the any floor, any ceiling, that sort of thing. And so all of that is going to relate back to affordability.
And I'll do this last question because I know we're up against the clock. What are your thoughts on robo investing? Several of the investment companies offer this as a starter investment option for new investors. Good, bad?
I'm going to defer to Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett is very folksy. And one of the things that he says that I love is that if you don't understand it, then don't do it. And so with robo investing, you have the potential for investing in things that you don't understand, or in ways, or developing a portfolio that may be beyond what you could manage on your own. So I would just be very leery of any type of investment strategy that you don't truly understand and you don't have someone to advise you.
Perfect. Dr. Yates, thank you so much for coming back to our webinar series and being part of yet another presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're
Thank you for the questions.
welcome.
They were fantastic.
And they could last for another 15, 20 minutes. So at some point we just have to say, okay, this is it for now. And I'm sure we'll have you back on in the future, so we'll get some of those answered.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
You're so welcome. And in a moment, we'll highlight a couple of upcoming events that are part of our Backpacks to Briefcases series that'll help you earn credit toward an evergreen certificate, as well as a few upcoming webinars. But first, a reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be uploaded this afternoon. Once it's online, attendees will get an email with the link. Our next Backpacks to Briefcases event is set for Thursday, April 11th here at the Alumni House. We've partnered with the UAB Career Center for the Stay in the Magic City Career Fest. Connect with alumni and students and hear from an alumni panel. Find out more at alumni.uab.edu/careerfest or on Handshake. Also, volunteer with us as part of our annual UAB Unite Day on Saturday, May 4th. We're heading back to Glen Iris Elementary School for a morning of giving back through volunteerism. Join us May 4th. Breakfast and lunch will be provided to volunteers. Register at alumni.uab.edu/Unite Day. And come back for these upcoming webinars. On Thursday, April 11th, return for the science of caffeine, chemistry, consumption, and controversies as Dr. Daniel Smith takes a look at all things caffeinated. Join us on Tuesday, April 23rd for the science of sleep, A to Z. Dr. Justin Thomas will be here as we explored sleep disorders, how to treat them, and the health consequences of poor sleep. Then on Wednesday, May 8th, we will welcome Mary Meadows Livingston for Between a Breadwinner and a Caregiver. During this webinar, we'll take a look at how to handle the needs for aging parents. And on Wednesday, June 26th, we'll be hosting Workplace Toxic Avengers Unite, how to recognize toxicity in the workplace and what to do about it. Dr. Alan Gorman will be here to share the signs of toxic employees, toxic culture, and what we can do to combat them. Register for these and more at alumni.uab.edu/events. Finally, let us know how we're doing and what you'd like to see. The QR code on your screen will take you to a very short survey that'll allow you to share your thoughts. Once again, thanks so much for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.